Should Labour sell a second referendum?
We'll keep the option of a people's vote on the table, and that will be a referendum on the deal itself, obviously. But my view is this, and I've said this time and time again, I want a general election. I think the vast majority of our members do as well, and our supporters do, because...
So I've talked before about the problems a second referendum creates, including deciding the question so it's fair to all sides of the Brexit argument, and having a vote to remain after our referendum to leave already. But Remainers, Momentum and Labour members want a second referendum, so could the Labour Party win vote by pushing for a second referendum?
Over the years, I and many others have been very critical of many decisions taken by the EU, and I remain very critical of its shortcomings, from its lack of democratic accountability to the institutional pressures to deregulate or privatise public services. So, Europe needs to change, but that change can only come from working with our allies in the European Union to achieve it.
From day one, Brexit has been a huge problem for the Labour Party, perhaps even bigger than the anti-Semitism scandal. Jeremy Corbyn seemed like he was going to be a Leave supporter before the referendum, but then unenthusiastically campaigned for Remain. He then faced a post-referendum leadership challenge, partly due to his leadership in the entire campaign.
Jeremy Corbyn is not resigning if there is another leadership election. Jeremy Corbyn will be standing again, and I will be supporting him.
Nonetheless, he won that leadership battle and subsequently won seats in the general election, despite not actually winning the election. Now, Brexit is an issue to Labour Party values for two main reasons. Number one, it was invented entirely by the Tories, from the inception of the referendum to the Chequers deal negotiations, all of it being a product of the Tory government.
So I would never say that people voted to come out because they were racist, but there is no question that in the month after the Brexit vote, we had a 41% rise in race hate. We saw that terrible killing of the Kurdish boy in Croydon. I'm not saying that there weren't good reasons to come out to vote to the EU, but let's be clear about the rise in hate crimes that we've seen since.
And number two, at Brexit's heart, is an end to free movement of people, which is essentially a more right-leaning policy and to some on the left amounts to xenophobia and racism. But the referendum proved that people voted Leave in many Labour areas, meaning the MPs of those constituencies believed differently to their constituents. The election last year went on to further prove this, as votes towards UKIP ended up more in Labour's hands, more than expected. Of course, it is possible to construct a viewpoint in favour of Brexit from the left of politics.
Rich people voted to stay in, and the poorer people, which is a lot more of them, voted to come out. They thought that they were going to wipe the floor and walk straight through, and that would be the end of the story. And unfortunately it's backfired, and now the Tory leaders had to resign, so we've got no Prime Minister.
Sounds like you quite relished the idea of giving them a bloody nose.
Oh, I did, yeah.
Firstly, the EU itself is a corrupt, undemocratic, capitalist establishment. And secondly, wages of the working classes have been lowered by the rules on free movement imposed by the European Union. That's how Labour has been wanting Brexit. They set out 6 key tests for the government's deal.
If we end up with no deal because of the lack of progress, that is a very bad position for Britain and a very bad position for the EU.
Stronger collaboration, the same benefits of the single market and customs union, fair migration, keeping our rights, protecting security, and for a deal that's equal across the entire UK. They say that if the government's deal doesn't meet these tests, they'll vote it down. But what confuses Brexiteer Labour voters is that Labour have already voted against many of Theresa May's proposals, making it essential for her to win over her own party to get things passed in Parliament. The more they block May, the more it seems likely we're going to have a no deal, which they don't want. It makes Labour seem against Brexit, and they seem like they just want to strike another general election to give themselves power.
At the heart of our manifesto is an offer to all of the people in our country that no other party is making, and that is that we don't just have to accept whatever deal we get back from the Brexit negotiations, but the British people, you, should have the final say. And if you don't like what Theresa May comes back with, you should have the right to vote to remain.
Back in 2017, it was the Liberal Democrats who wanted a second referendum. They won a few seats, but eventually leader Tim Farron resigned, and it wasn't the resounding victory they were hoping for. But it's not clear if that's because the second referendum option came only under the Lib Dem brand, or if voters at the time were actually against a second referendum. It's worth remembering that after Chequers, support for a people's vote has increased.
We are not opposing or calling for a second referendum. The referendum, the people decided that we should leave the European Union, and we respect that decision. However, as time has gone by, as you well know, the information that we're receiving about the terms and conditions of that separation are quite unlike the terms and conditions that were spoken of so loosely during the 2016 campaign.
The final problem for a second referendum in Labour is that Corbyn doesn't seem on side.
Your members want to be inside the single market, and they want to be inside the customs union, and they want a second referendum. Now, you always say that you listen to your members. Why do you not listen to them about these things?
I listen to members all the time. There are numbers of opinion polls being done. I'm not familiar with all of the questions that have been put to them. Yes, the membership of the Labour Party overwhelmingly voted to remain. Overwhelmingly, Labour supporters voted to remain, but a third of them didn't. A third of them voted the other way. I want to win the next election. I want to bring people together. We want to be a government that works for the whole country. Hence, the position we've adopted, which is of a trade relationship with Europe, is of social justice in Britain.
He's worried about what the question would be and how he could win over voters who want Brexit, but not the Tory version of it. A second referendum might well isolate these voters forever, but not accepting a second referendum isolates the voters who voted to remain. The better option for Labour is to let the Tories tear themselves apart first and then take the reins of Brexit. The only problem being the next most likely governing party is an equally divided Labour. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.